I'm a kayak fisherman. Steve asked me to present here because he's seen me do presentations at other places. I don't have anything for sale, so you don't have to worry about that. I do write the monthly Kayak Corner column in On the Water magazine. I saw one sitting up here. Those appear in the April to October issues. I also write, the occasional other articles. If you had this month's edition of On the Water, I had an article about kayak fishing for carp in there. And that brings us into my topic, which is kayak fishing the Northeast. And my presentation is not limited to just Massachusetts waters, because one of the great things about the kayak is that you can take it everywhere, and I take it wherever I go in the Northeast. I have in-laws that live in New York City, so some of my fishing's in New York City. Most of my fishing is in Boston Harbor. I fish the harbor as my #1 spot. I fish freshwater around here. You guys have a great river that flows through your town. There's some pictures in here from the Concord River. I fish up on the North Shore a lot. I do a lot of cod fishing up there from the kayak. So tonight I'm going to talk about a lot of the opportunities that we have here in the Northeast. Last fall I was in Lake Placid, New York, and they were having a writers convention there. And a couple of the writers were asking me about, "Did you really fish from a kayak?" It's like, what are you catching? And their impression was that, guys are getting these kayaks and going out and catching sunfish and having a great time. And if we get lucky, we might find a good brush pile and get some crappies or a pickerel or a bass or something really big like that. But kayaks are just a great platform for all-around fishing. One, you can take them anywhere. This thing is always on the top of my car. You see me driving by, I always have my kayak with me. I always tell you, the three great things about kayaks are their stealth, their portability, and your mobility on the water. You'd be amazed at how quiet a kayak is in the water. I've literally had breaking fish. I've had the bait fish come up in my drive well. There's a hole in the middle of the boat where my pedal drive goes. If you have questions about the pedal drive, I'll show you how it works later on. And literally, the bait fish will school up around these boats, and you'll have albies or stripers breaking all around you. In the middle of the night, one of the scariest things is when you lift your lure out of the water, and you hear that thump as a large striper hits the side of your kayak. I have to say, my most startling moment of this summer was I lifted my lure out of the water, and not just any lure, but like a real striper lure. I'm not fishing for an 18-inch striper. I lifted this thing out of the water, and nothing happened for that half a second. But half a second after I lifted it out, there was an absolutely enormous splash as a 30 to 40-pound striper hit the surface and literally threw a tail full of water all over me. So you can guess that my dry suit was wet both inside and out after that. So. Fish aren't really afraid of kayaks in many situations. They're great. I mean, I do a lot of vertical fishing in 7 to 10 feet of water. Sit on top of the fish that you're fishing for, and stripers, crappies, all different kinds of fish. The portability of the kayak's pretty obvious. This thing weighs 70 pounds. And I have a great set of wheels that go over sand, some rocks, and you just pop these things under your kayak and you wheel it down the beach, wheel it wherever you want to go, and through the woods. They're great for taking it places. So as long as you have somewhere to park and you can get to the water, you can throw this thing in just about anywhere. Most kayak fishermen tend to look for launch sites around the spots that they want to fish. I find a lot of launch sites near where my parking spots are. Question?
Talk a bit about car racks and stuff, because I'm in a situation where we think heat barrels and stuff is in a condominium development.
Yeah. Yes. Right. This kayak right here weighs 70 pounds unrigged, and for me that's as big a kayak as I'm comfortable with. And this is a relatively small kayak these days. Kayaks have gotten bigger and bigger, and people are buying 120-pound kayaks, and that's way too much for me to deal with. I do have one kayak that is a tandem, and it weighs 100 pounds, but I got a load bar for it. And a load bar is, the Thule racks. it just pulls right out of the side of the Thule rack. So you just lay your kayak on the ground next to it, you lift the nose of the boat up onto it, you walk around to the back of the boat, you slide the back of it onto the back of your car, and then you push it right up onto your rack, and it's a very easy load. You basically only have to be able to lift half the weight of the kayak at a time. So that's what I would recommend for a load situation. Yes, it's an accessory, and it literally goes inside the bar. Yeah. Yeah, I have one on my car, and you don't see it. Nothing sticks out while you drive around. It slides right up in there. So it's a great tool. So, and then the other thing is, you know, a kayak isn't as mobile as a boat. You're not going to go racing around. But if you're a runner or a bicyclist, you know, my normal speed in these is about 4.5 to 5 miles per hour. A casual pace, a walking pace, is about 3 miles per hour. With the kayak, you know, generally you're in fishy waters. At 3 miles per hour, you toss the lure back, you're trolling everywhere you go, and you find an awful lot of good spots that way. You know, the kayak is that transition between I'm a shore fisherman and I'm a boat fisherman. You know, one thing that boaters don't realize is that they're racing past so many fish to get to their spot to go fishing. It's amazing how many fish boaters will pass up to get to their spot to go fishing. I rarely go very far in my kayak. A typical trip, I might go 5 to 10 miles, but I'm doing that 5 to 10 miles in usually a 2 or 3 mile zone where I'm going back and forth and moving from spot to spot. I do a lot of you know, tide specific, you know, orienting myself to certain spots within the tide. Okay, so the question, why should you fish from a kayak? And that's what the rest of my presentation is about. I'm going to provide you a lawyerly case with the evidence today of why you should fish from a kayak. You go through my 2013 season. Every picture that you see in this presentation is a picture that I took during the 2013 season. It covers both salt and freshwater fishing. I'll fish anywhere. I'm not picky. My preference is to saltwater fish. I fish in my kayak year-round. In 2013, I caught a legal striped bass every month of the year in Boston. I didn't have to go to New York. I fished in New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. I finally did the Connecticut holdover thing this fall. It's amazing how many fish. Like my first time Connecticut holdover fishing, I marked more fish in like the first 7 minutes that I was on the water than I've marked in the last 10 years of holdover striper fishing around Boston. It's amazing how many fish are in those rivers. There are 19 different species in today's presentation, and that's only a portion of what I caught from the kayak this year in terms of species. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through the season and talk about what I do in the different parts of the season. So the beginning of the season, January, February, you can see that snow pictures, 224. I think that other fish is my first striper of 2013. That was like a 31, 32-inch striper that ate a hoagie, just slowly worked along the bottom. Most people don't realize that stripers are a year-round fish in New England. Not all of them migrate south. And it's not because they decided they found warm water and decided to stay. It's because there was a lot of forage around, and there's a lot of forage around here in the wintertime. You know, in the wintertime, you'd be amazed at how often I'm marking schools of bait fish. Smelt come up in the rivers and spawn. They're up in the rivers and spawning right now. And I will tell you that I have been on some amazing bites of stripers on smelt this time of year. This year, it's not going to happen because of the ice being on the ponds and the rivers. But the stripers will literally follow the smelt up the rivers just like they'll follow the herring. Now, you're not going to get the quantity of fish that you get when the herring are in, but if you know where to look for smelt, there's going to be some stripers around there, especially after dark. So freshwater fishing is always the easiest opportunity as long as you can find some open water. I love to go out and hit the big lakes early in the season. This past year, I went up to Lake George, which is a really fun place. And the great thing about the kayak is that I can go out and fish the deep water of Lake George, and I can get right up in the shallows. Early in the season, in April, this was an April trip. you know, I caught some 5-pound lake trout literally in 2.5 feet of water. When I was fighting that fish, I actually ran aground. I got that fish up in so shallow. And those, you know, those fish, there's the traditional stuff that people fish with for lake trout and bass. You don't have to go with that. You can go with like a light little rod like this and little tube jigs. Amazingly effective. You don't need the casting distance in a kayak, so you can use a lot of lure types that you wouldn't normally use. You don't have to cast too far off your boat when you're in lake or water that's very shallow. The kayak is great for trolling along the shorelines. I was working the shorelines of the lake and trolling along the edges of the docks and catching a mix of lakers and smallmouths and just trolling like these little Yozuri pins minnows. Those are extremely effective for those. It's also a great tactic for salmon. I catch this in 2013. I didn't get up to Winnipesaukee or any of the big lakes to do any salmon fishing, but salmon are really easy to target out of the kayak. You know, you see these guys out on their boats, and they're throwing buckets behind their boats, 5-gallon buckets to slow their boat down so they're not trolling too quickly. In the kayak, you're going whatever speed you want to go. If you want to go 1.2 miles per hour or 0.7 miles per hour, you just look on your GPS fish finder, get your speed on there, and just watch your speed. And as the fish move down in the water column, you know, you don't need a downrigger. I use clip-on sinkers like this. I'll toss my lure back for trolling, clip this onto the line with a downrigger clip, and drop it down 15 feet, and now I'm trolling 15 feet down. It's a really effective technique for catching stuff like salmon. It's also a great midsummer technique if you want to troll up some really big smallmouth bass. Those big smallmouth bass like to hang in that 30 to 35 foot range, and you drop one of those things down with a crankbait behind it. Super effective from a kayak. And again, you really get to dial in on the speed aspect of it and also the location because you have a super maneuverable boat. Question?
In this ice cold water, you always wear a dry suit? You mentioned that, something like that earlier.
Yeah, it's a good question. In the wintertime, and basically any time that's not like June to September, I'm wearing a complete dry suit. It's comfortable, it's easy to wear, and it provides an added layer of safety. I mean, basically, I think with this thing on, I would not need a life jacket, but again, I never go out without my life jacket, and we were talking about, you know, what kind of life jacket you use. To me, a life jacket's like a seatbelt. I've never actually needed it, but if I go over, I don't want some inflatable that might not inflate. I want to have a real life jacket on, and this one is a real life jacket, and it really smells like fish a little bit, so it's a genuine article. So it's nice having a real life jacket on and having that just in case. Because in a kayak, if you go over on a really windy day, none of us in this room can swim as fast as that kayak can blow in the wind. So if you go over, you want your kayak to flip over too, because it's not gonna blow off and drift as fast if it's upside down. This is a sit-on-top kayak, so it's not gonna fill up with water. If you take a look at it, it literally has a hole in the middle of the boat, and it's got scupper holes in here where the water's gonna drain out. You can take a wave over this boat, and all the water will be out of it in less than a minute. So the sit-on-tops are a real safety advantage in the ocean. Question?
Just a question about an anchor or a drag. You spoke of the wind.
Yes.
Stay stable somewhere. Do you have something?
Yeah, if you are using a paddle kayak, yes, you need something like an anchor or a windsock, but that's a lot of work in a kayak. That's why I use the Hobie. It's a pedal-driven kayak, and so I'm fishing, and you know the pedals are up here. I've got my feet on the pedals the whole time. If I'm fishing a windy day, I go nose into the wind, and you pedal it. It's extremely fast to pedal. It's way easier than paddling a kayak, but I just keep myself in position in the wind with my pedals.
Can you explain scupper holes?
Yeah, scupper holes are just drainage holes. So there's a hole back here that goes all the way through. So if a wave should come in the back part of the boat, the water just drains right out.
That doesn't let water in?
No, because it's above the water line. Yeah, I mean, if you fish in a kayak, you're going to get wet. That's one of the rules of kayak fishing. You have to get wet. There is no way to stay dry when you're kayak fishing.
What about a place like the mouth of the Merrimack? I mean, have you ever tried anything like that? I would
You
say
know,
the water goes too fast.
I will do the Deer Island Rip at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I won't do the mouth of the Merrimack. So, yeah. No, there's certain places that you just want to stay away from. It's just not worth it.
We should probably hold the questions to the end. So,
Okay.
sorry. Eric will be here during.
Yeah.
too.
Okay. April. That's a great, the first stripers start hitting our water in April. One of my favorite places to go early in the season is Jamaica Bay. Jamaica Bay is where the JFK airport is, and it's a huge bay. It's, imagine a giant Joppa Flats, only with unbelievable channels running through it, and the biggest schools of bunker you've ever seen in the back part of it. So if you like to live line bunker, that's a definite place to go. I'm not a big bait fisherman. I do mostly plastics, but we did an early trip there in April with one of my buddies, and he had never fished hoagie plastics before. So we were tossing 10-inch pink plastics around, and there he is holding up a 36-inch bass that he caught on a 10-inch plastic. We had a great trip there, and we were just kind of picking at these fish that were just, they weren't really in all the way yet, but we were consistently catching them. We caught some nice sized fish, and had a good time just going around tossing plastics. There we were fishing 30 feet of water, which is really deep for Jamaica Bay. There's two sides to it. There's a shallow side and a deep side, and it's harder to fish baits like this in 30 feet of water. But as you can see, we were successful. We were just marking the fish on the fish finder, and just working those areas where we found the fish. A lot of freshwater opportunities in April. You know, one thing that many people don't realize is that April is when some of the biggest largemouth bass are caught. I don't do much largemouth bass fishing. They're usually more incidental catch for me, but this was a day when it was a perfect day, and going out and just working around the weed beds. It was one of those early April days that was, or late April days that was just too good to not get out there. So, you know, the kayaks are great up in shallow. I'm fishing like 2 to 4 feet of water here, and even though the water was still in the upper 40s, the fish were active and catching fish. In May, there's the largest kayak fishing tournament in the Northeast. That's the Jamaica Bay Kayak Fishing Tournament. It's an unbelievable tournament. There's literally 200 guys that camp out on a tarmac there. They hold it at the Floyd Bennett Field, and people literally drive stakes into the tarmac and put up tents and turn it into a city, and 350 entrants every year. And the fishing is amazing. For reference, that bluefish, I tied for first place in the slam division last year with a 36-inch bluefish, a 38.5-inch bass, and like a 29-inch weakfish. So it was, you know, it was the first time anybody had broken 100 inches in the slam division, and me and another guy did it at the same time. So just some really impressive fish down there. We were catching a lot of bass in the 30 to 38-inch size, both in the deep water where the bunker were, and also up in relatively shallow water along channel edges, working jigs along channel edges. Jamaica Bay is an extremely windy place. Over the course of a 4-day tournament, I pedaled this boat 65 miles. So it's a good workout. It'll keep you in shape. But I chose to go to spots that were spread out, and you know, you get out of it what you put into it. I ended up catching a lot of fish last year. The other thing about Jamaica Bay is that they have these great weak fish. Last year, the fish were kind of small. These fish that you see are in the 20 to 25-inch range. But in years past, I've gotten them up to, my biggest one there was a little over 17 pounds. So there's some really hardy weak fish there. And the weak fish are fun because they like lures. All these were caught on plastics. Pink plastics are the best. A lot of 7-inch hoagies, a lot of 10-inch hoagies, swimming those on, you know, anywhere from a 1/4 ounce head up to a 1 ounce head, depending on how deep the water was. This was a nice size fish. This was, I think, my 29-inch fish that I did well in the tournament with. That one came on a 10-inch hoagie. And one of the great things about the tournament there is that it's all catch and release. So you see the tape measure on the side of the boat. You photograph the fish on that, and you let them go. So. Early summer is a great time for getting out for flounder. Flounder are they're such an easily accessible fish, and pretty much anywhere around here. I mean, you can go in the harbors, Manchester Harbor, Gloucester Harbor, Boston Harbor. Any harbor's got them. Salem Harbor. They're just all over the place. It's a great fish to take your kids out for. It's just a great fish to go out and catch something for dinner. After a morning where I'll often get out at like 2 o'clock in the morning and go out and catch a bunch of striped bass. And then as the bass bite dies down, I want to bring something home to eat. And so, you've been catching all these 30 to 40-inch stripers, but you don't really have anything to eat when you're doing that, right? Because you let them all go. So now you're like, I got to get something to eat. So you go catch a bunch of flounder and take those home, and kids love them. So kayaks are a great platform for taking kids fishing. My little guy, he said, Daddy, I want to catch a catfish. And imagine if your kid says to you, I want to catch a catfish. Pressure's on, right? You say, of course, we're going to go out and catch a catfish, no problem. Now, I got spots to catch catfish, but I hadn't been fishing for catfish. That was one of the few in the last 10 years that I've caught out of the kayak. And so I said, yeah, we're going to go out and we'll catch a catfish. I guarantee it. And fortunately, in like the first half hour, he caught himself a catfish, so he was pretty happy. But one of the advantages of kayaks and kids is it's just fun to take them out. They like racing around in the kayak. And two, you can put them in spots where they don't really have to do anything. So I literally had him just dropping worms down against the bridge abutments, and we're just kind of walking them along the bridge abutments looking for the catfish. And he was catching perch and other stuff. And then after he caught his catfish, we went and found a little shallow cove, and I had him toss a bobber with worms on it so he could watch the bobber going. He had so much fun doing that. So that's how I'm getting him hooked on fishing. But I also have to take his sister out, who's a little bit older. The bigger kids want a little more adventure, so I've been taking her out flounder fishing. And one important thing when you take your kids out, they should always outfish you. It's one of the critical things about taking the kids out. They have to be number one. So she totally outfished me that day. And then if you have a bigger kid, so it was like July 3rd. We needed to get some fish for a barbecue. And the neighbor said, you have to bring us a fish for our barbecue. I said, okay. I don't normally keep 2 fish with stripers, but it's like, okay, we'll catch two fish. But you know what? I'm not going to fish. I will jig up some bait. So I took him out and we jigged up some live mackerel. And I had him sitting in the front of the boat. It's a pretty good gig if you can get it. He sat in the front of the kayak, tossed the mackerel out. I pedaled the kayak and taught him how to troll. By the end of the trip, he knew what he was doing, as you could see. He caught the biggest bass on there. It's not as big as it looks. It was almost 20 pounds. So, but he picked up the 2 stripers and a bluefish with no help from Dad. Just did everything on his own. Live mackerel are a really easy bait to fish out of the kayak. There's a lot of guys who really, that's what they focus in on in that June, early July period when there's a lot of mackerel around. I have a bait tank that fits right back here. You just load it up. It can hold like 20 mackerel pretty easily, and then get them back up in the rocks and toss them out there. I'm not the biggest live bait guy. I mean, I do like fishing live bait, but I have this thing about fishing big plastics, and I like to get bit on the crank. So even when there's a lot of good bait around, I'll do 1 or 2 trips with live mackerel, but the rest of it is I'm going to go back there to the same spots at night and toss my plastics up in there and just catch them on the crank. Another great opportunity around here is all these big lakes that we have. They have a lot of fish in them, surprisingly. This was a trip up to Lake Placid. I had never fished at Lake Placid before. So I went out and just found some areas to drop some jigs down. Lake trout, once you get into July and August, lake trout all go down below the thermocline. Early in the morning, you control the thermoclines for them, And again, that's what this sinker type rig is for. But I don't really do much trolling for stuff like lake trout. I'll take them and I'll use like small metal jigs. Like this is one of those Cabela's real image jigs. It's like this one's probably 1.5 ounces, but I'll use like the 1 ounce to or 3/4 ounce to 1.5 ounce size, and just go work the deeper water. And I was jigging, and I was catching mostly small lake trout in the like 2 to 3 pound range. And then all of a sudden, I set the hook on a fish, and I was like, looked down at my reel, and the line was just steadily going off, and I'm like, wow, this one feels a little bit bigger. And that fish on the bottom was it was like a 29-inch lake trout. Got it on my a little light bass rod with 12-pound test, just jigging on the bottom, and they're fun to catch. I got that guy in about 70 feet of water, and released it. It was a nice fish though. And in a first for me, I also jigged up a lake whitefish. I'd caught the round whitefish, but never actually caught a lake whitefish. Not that common, but they have them at Winnipesaukee and all the big lakes around us. I just hadn't hit any yet. Unusual fish. Looks just like a big herring. I was tempted to drop it back down to see what I would get on it, but that hatch is like 11 inches, so that's probably like a 14 or 15-inch fish, which would have been a pretty large bait, but if there was a 20-pound laker down there, he probably would have eaten it. But my favorite thing to catch during the middle of the summer is striped bass. And you got your choice. You can catch big striped bass or little striped bass. And my personal preference is I like to catch the bigger ones more. I mean, it's just me. I know not everybody likes that. But a lot of people are like, well, how are you targeting big striped bass? It's like, well, I'm doing the things that it takes to target big striped bass. The kayak is a great platform for catching big striped bass. There's a lot of guys around Boston Harbor that get a lot of good-sized striped bass out of kayaks. And one of the reasons is what I was talking about before, is the stealth of the kayak. It's a very quiet way to get in there. You're getting into schools of fish. One thing that you probably don't get a lot in the boat is when you're buzzing along and you spook that school of fish that's kind of lazing like right under the surface. You do that in the kayak, and you spook them, and they're all splashing around you, but they don't really go very far. And now you know where this school of big fish is. They may not be turned on, but when I find those fish, I'll hang out in that area for a long time. The kayak is just a great way to get into fish and stay on them. You have those nights where you find that school of fish, and you pull one out of it, and that spooks the school. And now you move around, and you find them again, but now they're in a little different spot, and you catch them, and that spooks the school. If you're in a boat and you're motoring around, you're not going to keep finding those schools of fish. If you're in a kayak, you're going to keep finding those fish. Most of the big fish that you see in here are all caught on the same lure. It's my favorite is the 13-inch jig and hoagie. And at night, I pretty much we were talking about colors before the presentation. I pretty much just fish the blamber color. It's black and amber, but black and blamber. I prefer dark colors at night, light colors during the day. This is just a super effective lure. The other thing that makes a huge difference is the jig head you choose. These big stripers, you catch a 5-pound striper, and you set the hook on them. The hook goes right in, penetrates nicely. You bring that fish in and you land it. But you get a big fish like this. These fish are grubbing in the rocks. Most of the fish that I'm catching are eating crabs and lobsters. They're picking those things up in their mouth and they're crushing them. And I know that if I crushed a lobster in my mouth, shell and all, I probably wouldn't be able to eat for like 6 to 8 weeks until the stitches healed. But stripers don't have that issue. I mean, the stripers, if you stick your hand in their mouth, it's like wood in there. I mean, you cannot drive, there's not that many spaces for you to drive a hook into. And so what happens with a normal jig head is you don't get full penetration on the hook a lot of the times. Just the tip will go in. And now you're pulling your hook out like this. And people are like, how can you bend out a hook in a kayak? You can't put that much pressure on a fish. I use 50-pound leaders on my rods, but I'm doing that because I'm fishing in 4 feet of water with rocks and weeds. I do it for abrasion resistance, not because I'm pulling 50 pounds. A striper can pull this thing at 3.5 miles per hour when you're under tow. So you're not putting up that much resistance, but I'm still bending hooks. And the problem is not that the striper is so strong he's bending a hook. The problem is the lack of penetration of the hook point. And I tell you, I have fished pretty much any jig head you can buy. I have fished it. I probably own more jig heads styles than everybody in this room has in their basement right now. I spent just a really long time looking for high quality jig heads, and I called up Mike Hogan of Hoagie after one particularly bad night where I literally bent out 3 hooks in a row, and you know that's just so frustrating to lose 3 fish in a row. The size of fish that you're bending hooks on, those aren't, you know, that's not schoolies. That's a solid fish. And Mike was like, we were talking about what kind of hooks we could use, and he came up with these Barbarian hooks, these are really the only hook that I've found that can stand up to the type of fishing that I do. The difference on these things is they've got that funny bend of the hook, so you do get better penetration with these, and it rolls the fish down to the bend of the hook, and so you're not just, you know, in it pulling against the tip of the hook. The other thing is that these are just a much heavier gauge wire than pretty much any other jig hook that I've found. And the point of these hooks is unbelievably sharp. So you get the penetration in some of the spots where you normally can't penetrate a jig. One of the things about getting the big fish is that you don't always get good penetration on them, and you'll bring those big fish up to the boat, and they'll shake their heads, and you can literally see that you've got them hooked like this. And all you have to do is put a little slack in the line, and they're gone. And sometimes, you know, you fought the fish out, why not? Just put a little slack in the line, let them swim off, and go on to your next cast. So, but the bigger baits are great for the bigger fish. For standard size fish, if you want to go out and just catch a lot of fish in the like legal size range, a 10-inch on a half-ounce head, these swim great on their own. You just literally don't have to do much to them. You just cast them out and crank them in 2 to 4 feet of water. You find bass up in the rocks and weeds, these are just absolute killers. If you said, you got to go out and you got to catch me a legal fish, that's what I'd use. You know, if you were having a contest to see who could get one the fastest, I would not use bait. I would not use any surface lures. I'd just go out and toss a plastic on a half-ounce head in shallow water. Just find a nice rip to throw it into. So you can see this tape measure. Like a yardstick is normally 36 inches long, but like when you're kayak fishing, you get that extra. This is like one of those Spinal Tap things. It doesn't go up to 10, it goes up to 11. So this yardstick is 48 inches. So if you got a 48-inch yardstick, right, you should have a fish that goes from one end of the yardstick to the other. So that's one of the benefits of kayak fishing. You get those fish that go the full length of your yardstick. So just some general big bass pictures. The one in the lower right corner that's a morning mackerel fish that was a really, really hefty fish. It's a really fat one that he caught off of an area where the bass were just feeding on mackerel. And there's nothing like those fall fish. Like you can tell the one in the upper left-hand corner, that's a real fall fish. It's been feeding on pogies. That one's got that kind of the rolls of fat on its belly, and just has that nice roll to it. August is an unbelievably good month fishing Boston Harbor. It's really the peak of the harbor fishing. Everybody waits for the fall run, and by the time fall comes around, the best of the fishing is pretty much long gone, unless there's a lot of pogies around. Just some more general striper shots. My son up there catching, even he can catch them on a plastic. Just pulled up in the rip, had him toss a hoagie out on a rip line, and bam, he was on. So he's learning. One day he'll be a master. And I like to let the big ones go. I generally will never keep a fish over 40 inches. My friend Joe, who does the fished impressions, I don't know if you've seen the guys who paint the fish. He does beautiful paintings, so I gave him a 45-inch fish last summer because he wanted a really big one. to paint. So I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't being wasted. But I recommend if you're going to eat stripers, eat the smaller ones. You don't have all the bioaccumulation of stuff in them. And the big ones, they have the good genes. We know they have the good genes. The small ones might have good genes, but you don't know it yet. Late summer on Cape Cod, a great place to take the kayak out. There's after Labor Day, there's just so many places to launch. One of the biggest challenges of kayak fishing can be albie fishing out of the kayak. They can be easily caught out of the kayak, and they can be really difficult to catch out of the kayak. I was down there on one morning, and man, they were up over there, and they were up over there like 30 seconds later, and then another minute later, they were like 500 yards that way. And I was in a 2-mile-per-hour current. I actually was able to get a couple fish out of it, but it was a tough morning for kayaking for albies. But that's one of the great things about the Cape is that it's just you have so much variety down there. So, you know, the black sea bass bite down there can be amazing, and during albie season, you know, I was drifting along all these ridges, and behind every ridge there was a ball of bait, and the albies were busting on those balls of bait. And once they stopped busting on those balls of bait, I went back up and jigged those ridges with both the metals and with plastics. And you know, with stripers, it's really easy to cull bigger fish out of a school. But I found with black sea bass, it's not that easy, but it can be done. You know, you fish the 10-inch hoagie around, you know, 10 to 14-inch bass, sea bass, and you still catch 10 to 14-inch sea bass. You catch them as the same size as the lure. But you know, I also managed to get some of the bigger fish, and I felt like I was more likely to get the bigger fish on the bigger baits than on the smaller stuff. But with the kayak, with the Hobie, you know, I'm pedaling up on those the ridges and just hanging on those ridge lines, and wherever the fish are hanging, you can just keep yourself in place, right up nose and into the wind, and hopefully the wind and current are at least going in the same direction. If they're not, it can be a real horror show out there with the waves and everything. But you know, you take advantage of the conditions. If they're working against each other, you set yourself up so the wind pushes you up against the current, and you stay in one spot. And that's really that's why I fish out of the pedal kayak, because there's so many times when you're fighting the wind. You know, Boston actually gets more rain than Seattle, and we get more wind than Chicago. So that's one of the great challenges of kayak fishing. And then every fall, there's the saltwater jigging. This is pretty much the same stuff that I do for Lakers, except you upsize your baits a little bit. You know, instead of using a 6-inch lure like you might use for a lake trout, you throw down a 10-inch on a 3-ounce head, or you know, just one of these metals, a slab bait. Tip this stuff with squid for cod, and it's amazing what you get. Some of the cod you get are like the one on the bottom, that bright red color. Everybody says they're like super full of worms. It's not really any difference in terms of worminess between those guys and the brown cod that you see up top. The inshore cod they just barf up the lobster bits all over your boat. It's amazing how many, I could have had lobster for dinner every night if I had kept all the stuff that they were throwing up into the boat. But you also catch other stuff. In the upper left corner, I had never eaten a pollock before, so I kept a couple of pollock and tried those. They were actually pretty good. And then the dreaded cunner. The cunner up there that I was catching were in the 14 to 16-inch range. They were like 1 to 2 pound fish, so I kept a couple of those, and we fried them up for dinner, and they were great. So, and I like fish like that because, you know, most people consider them a trash fish. It's a very underutilized resource, and they taste just as good as the cod and the other stuff you're catching. So, and there's a lot of them. And this is just taking my kayak out, you know, a half a mile to a mile offshore and fishing the ridges. I have a nice fish finder on here, but I use the Navionics chip in there, so I can identify the humps and bumps, and that's a real plus, especially like any of the deep water jigging that you're doing to find ridges. I don't know how many of you guys are using them in your boats, but if you're not using them on a boat, you should be. But to find all the bumps and the ridges and the sides of structure, having the chip is invaluable. And then, a lot of the cod fishing, that centers around, it's not just, you find the structural element, but then you go around it and you look on your fish finder and you say, what part of this structure has the weed bed on it? As soon as you find that weed bed, you found where the fish are going to be hanging. The cod really relate to wherever the weeds are. They're hanging out, picking off all the smaller fish. They're spitting up small cunner. They're spitting up crabs. They're spitting up lobsters. Not much in the way of bait fish, but mostly the bottom fish that you're seeing there. And one of the great things about inshore cod fishing is that I'm using the same stuff that I'm using to catch largemouth bass to catch cod. A lot of this fishing is at 60 feet. The deepest that I'm really fishing is down to 80 feet. So on days when it's not too windy, I'm using a 1 ounce head, and on windy days I'm using a 2 ounce head. When it really gets windy, I'll drop the plastic and just strictly use different metals for them. I prefer to use the plastics. The plastics, you get a little bit bigger profile, and I think I end up catching more bigger fish on the plastics than I do on the metals. And then late fall into winter, you can see in the lower right corner that was one of our many snow days. That was actually, I think, early December, one of our snow days there. The other picture in the lower left corner is from the Concord River. Found a spot where I got out and chummed. Carp are a great fish. I love catching carp early season and late season. I can't take my prime fishing time in the summer to go carp fishing just because the stripers are always calling me. But carp are a tough fish to beat. When you can go out in December and go and catch 3 or 4 fish over 10 pounds in fresh water, that's kind of an irresistible proposition to me. And carp are pretty easy out of the kayak. I mean, everybody has this picture of, I can only catch carp by still fishing from the bank. And yeah, that's a really effective technique. But if you're on a pond or a river with no banks, like the Concord River doesn't have a lot in the way of banks, you get out and some of the times you can mark fish and find those fish, and then either I use a fish gripper, one of those lip grippers, and I just clamp them onto the brush on the side of the river to hold myself in place, throw out some chum, and there I go. If I hook a big fish, I just pop the brush gripper off, he pulls me out into the middle of the river, and the fish never swims up into the weeds on the side of the river. In ponds, I fish a lot in some ponds that have carp, and I'll find the spots where carp really aggregate in ponds around drop-offs, and I'll chum those areas with bread, and bread is a great chum because you can just turn it into liquid, and so they don't have anything to eat, but they're swimming around below you hungry, and then you just take a bread ball, no weight at all, and you just sink it down to them, and they'll hit a drifted bread ball, where I have not found that they'll hit drifting corn very well. But bread ball, I guess they like that natural drift of bread balls in their natural environment. Panfish are also a great thing in the fall. One of the things about New England is that we have so many rivers that end up in ponds, and those rivers go all the way to the ocean. Well, every spring, the herring come up, chased by those bass. And every fall, there may be still some bass in those ponds, but all those herring fry are now about that big. And one of the most spectacular sights you'll ever see as a fisherman is when those 8 to 12 inch white perch come up and start breaking on a school of baby herring. And the baby herring are spraying all over the place, and the white perch are flipping out of the water and boiling. And this will happen in some of these ponds every single morning for weeks on end. And those white perch are getting pretty fat. But there's also some good-sized yellow perch and crappies in those ponds too. Any pond with a population of herring is going to support way more fish than a similar pond that is completely landlocked and the herring don't have access. They're just bringing in so much food into those ponds. just something to consider when you're freshwater fishing. And every year I always catch my biggest bass when I'm my biggest largemouth bass of the season when I'm fishing for panfish. It's invariably on a school of herring, and I'm flipping one of these little tiny tube jigs, little 2-inch tube jig on just an 1/8 or a 16th ounce head on a light rod, and all of a sudden you get something that slams you, and you say, wow, this is much bigger. It's always a good sized largemouth bass. And then at the end of the season, as winter stripers. This was my first trip down to the Housatonic, and we killed them. It was amazing how many fish there were. It's not the type of fishing that I think I would do that much if I had access to it, but as the occasional thing, it's fun to go out and catch some fish. It's easy to get your fill pretty quick of 20-inch stripers, so you go out and you catch a few, and things are good. You caught a fish, and you go home happy. So can't beat that fishery. Especially this was actually the week after Christmas, so you can see it's not as warm as it looks. My buddy was out there with no gloves, and it was like it started off at like 10-mile-per-hour winds and got up to about 20, and it was about 25 degrees. It was pretty nippy out there, so I was pretty impressed by his no glove ability. So, but a fun spot, easy fish to catch, and again, just the ease of tossing the kayak in the river, pedaling up, marking the schools on your fish finder, going out and working them slowly with your jigs and catching lots of fish. That's kind of what kayak fishing is all about. So that's my year in review. One of my last days out on Boston Harbor. It looks like a sunset, but it's really a sunrise because. But I thought it was a fitting ending. Any questions? Yeah.
What's a good kayak for a beginner?
It really just depends on your budget. I recommend staying away from the sit-in kayaks and getting a sit-on-top kayak. There's so many good quality kayaks out there. You set your budget and then find a kayak that meets your budget. Any of them, I would stick to the name brands: Ocean Kayak, Hobie, Jackson. There's a whole bunch of different brands, but I would stick to the major brands and not go bargain basement. They tend to have pretty good resale value, so you can usually sell them for 75% of what you paid for them. In the end, most of us ended up getting a Hobie, just because a Hobie is going to cost you twice as much, but it comes with your pedal drive and your seats and everything you need.
We were fishing one at Sake last summer in like a 14-foot fishing boat. We were trying to get Lakers. It's pretty windy on the lake.
Yep.
And we'd see them on the fish finder down around 60 feet.
Yep.
And they would just stay in this one column. And we'd try to jig over that column, but we'd keep drifting out of the column and trying to go back through it again. Couldn't get it.
That's the disadvantage of a boat, and that's where if you turn your boat around and go backwards, and just keep bumping yourself in reverse, you keep your butt to the wind so that you keep pulling yourself back up into that current. But with the kayak, you point yourself into the wind, and you just keep pedaling to stay on the spot. I mean, I've done that kind of jigging where you find that fish in a zone, and they're just in that like 50 feet. You pedal back up, and then you go through that 50 feet, and it might take you a half hour to drift that 50 feet because you're going so slowly over that structure. But that's really what you have to do. And if it's not as windy, you can try other types of baits. I think the plastics and the small stuff on jig heads are actually more effective. Lakers can be really tough to hook on single hook jigs because they do have a hard mouth. You get a lot of those ones where you set the hook, you have them on for a second, and they just spit it. And that happens less with a treble hook on a metal jig, but you get more hits on the plastics. So, question?
What is the price range, would you say, for a good kayak like the one you brought here? What would you say is the price range for some of the different brands on the high, some of them on the low?
Yeah,
some in the middle?
good question. Like Hobie kayaks tend to go for like $1,800 to $2,000, and that includes your pedal drive, where something like an ocean kayak is going to go from $1,000 to $1,300, and then you end up buying your paddle to go along with it. You don't get a pedal drive along with it. So you also get a paddle with a Hobie, and you need a paddle because there's going to be times when you break. It's a mechanical device in salt water. Enough said. There's going to be times when you break it, and you have to have your paddle with you at all times. But you can also there's a lot of lower end kayaks that you can get in the $500 to $700 range. You know, I recommend staying away from the store brand stuff, but you know, Dick's and all these stores, they all have West Marine, they all have their own kayaks.
And would you recommend staying away from like the $200, $300 kayaks then?
Yeah, at least for saltwater. I mean, for freshwater, if you're feeling safe and you're feeling, you know, if you're fishing in protected waters, yeah, I would say that's fine. But, you know, I want to, when I'm out on the ocean, I want something that I can count on under me.
Fly fishing platform for fly fishing.
Yeah, you know, it's hard to fly fish sitting down.
Yes.
And maybe Charlie will give us some tactics for fly fishing sitting down. But you know, the nice thing is, in the kayak, you don't have to cast as far. So yes, you may be sitting down and you lose some of your distance, but you don't need the same distance.
So why don't we take one more question and then we'll take a break?
Yeah.
You know, you have the pedal drive and that, but if you don't have that, you're using your oar, how the heck do you fish and paddle and all that?
It's a lot harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is a lot harder.
Technique there, I mean, what are you doing? You just,
You put it in your lap, and you use a paddle leash because it will fall off your lap and fall over the side. So you've always got it leashed on the side of the boat, tethered to the side of the boat. And some guys will just take it and they'll paddle up and they'll throw the paddle over the side and let it float next to their boat. Paddles float. You know, obviously you don't want your boat separating from it, but paddle leashes are very good. And you know, I've never had the guts to throw my paddle over the side when I had a paddle kayak. So I'll hang out in the break and you can come up and ask questions.
So if any of you think,
Without further ado, and the other things too is I don't know how many of you are members of the club, but if you want any information on the Rod and Gun Club, there's a brochure over there. There's some outside, and or you probably have my email address, or you will. You can just email me, and I can send you information on the club. It's not very expensive. We got all kinds of fishing stuff, hunting stuff, track. There's a great archery range out there and a pistol range in the basement. And with that, I'll give you Charlie.
Should I just keep this in my pocket?
Just give you the
Okay.
pocket.
All right.
I'll let him talk a little bit, and then when he wants me to, I'm going to start his movie. A lot of his presentation is going to be playing this DVD that I gather he put together, so I'll let him talk about that.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about it. Good evening, everybody. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody for taking the time to come and watch the presentation tonight. Certainly a nice way to get rid of some cabin fever, I'm sure. I found Eric's presentation to be somewhat of an overlay to what I'm going to do in terms of we jig on the Nissitissit and Squannacook too, but we call them beadheads. I'll tell you quickly about myself. I've been fly fishing for 48 years. This is my 49th year. I started when I was 16. And my godfather was nice enough to get me into fly fishing. He has since passed on, but I can't tell you the amount of therapy and personal satisfaction and overwhelming calmness that fly fishing has brought to my life. I couldn't thank him enough for what he's done. And I hope somewhere in this group we play pass along with other folks as well. The video that I made was called You Don't Need a Tea Time to Fish. It took us about a year to make it. We dove under the waters of the Nissitissit and Squannacook, took an underwater and an above water perspective of both rivers. It's a river that I've fished, as I said, for 49 years, or 48 years. Haven't fished it yet this year. Mother Nature has precluded me from walking out there. I suppose I could, but when if you choose at some point, as Steve said, the videos are for sale. If you choose at some point and you do purchase the video, the default will show up as play movie, but use your clicker and scroll over to scene selection and features as well on the boxes. They'll light up next to it. And because I've sold several hundred of these, maybe 400 copies. And folks, when I ask them about some of the things in the scene selection and the features, they look at me like I have two heads because they missed it totally. All right, so when you're done after play movie, go to scene selection and features. There'll be some directions in there. There'll be some recommended flies, things of that nature. I'm going to try to keep this down. I don't want to be accused of taking an hour and a half to watch 60 minutes. So I'll try to move this along quickly. I also have created a map now for the first time. It took me 3 months, finally got it all done. It has GPS coordinates on it and all kinds of interesting facts about the Nissitissit and Squannacook rivers. And it has a hatch chart on it for you. Okay. How many people here have ever been to the fly shop in Pepperell? So I've done an okay job of locating, at least letting people know that I'm there. So if you want to come over at some point, we're more than happy. You can leave your money at home, and I mean that sincerely. We're there to help you, answer questions, direct you toward geography that you may not know about. And if you purchase stuff, that's wonderful, but that's not what it's all about, truly. Also, the state brings me the fish, and I have a core of 15 to 20 guys and gals that show up. There's a woman sitting over there that's helped us stock, and she was in the video. So on my website, on the homepage is links. Go way over to the left where it says links and click on it, because there's a really nice video that we made, and it's evident that the gang could not shoot straight. I think they ended up concussing more fish than they ended up putting in the water. It's a really fun video. It's 6 minutes long, and you'll get a kick out of watching the stalking video. I say that under the guise of, if you'd like to take part in stalking, feel free to come by, leave your name, send me an email. I'd be happy to notify you when the stalking is going to take place. It's a real fun activity. Bring a kid along with you, and you'll actually get to put the fish in the water, pet your little friends before you let them go, and maybe give them a promise that you'll be back to hook them with a sharp object of feathers and thread. So, okay, I think I'd like to move this along, but prior to getting started with the video, I'm going to move it along. Is there anybody have any questions initially that I can address for you? Bree?
One,
Yes, please.
Gilman's Pool.
Yes,
I know that gets fished pretty heavy.
it does.
I also know the kids swim there a lot in
Yep.
summer. I have a tough time fishing that pool. Are they just wary of everything that's thrown at them there?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's a combination of, in many cases, people come to me and say, what's the favorite fly? And my favorite statement beyond you don't need a tea time to fish is it's not the arrow, it's the Indian. And so I say that because it's really important that folks not necessarily show up there and be disappointed, but hone their skills there. Because the Gilman's Pool is the deepest pool on the river. It's like anything else. When you put a bullseye on something, every Tom, Dick, and Harry and Jane and whatever else is going to show up to fish it. And so those fish have seen a lot of flies. They've seen a lot of different presentations. As a result of that, it may just be a skill set issue that needs to be. So, come and talk to me. Tell me about the fish activity, what you're seeing, and I'll try to recommend some techniques to use for retrieval and different techniques to use that might help, your catch rate. The last thing I want to say before I go is this, folks. Everybody in this country right now is focused in on somehow finding a cure for our energy solutions. I really would like to submit to you that we have a much bigger problem. We need as many future stewards for clean waters that we can possibly find. Energy we're going to solve. We have the technology to solve the energy problem in this country. I don't know where we're going to find more clean waters. So if you can get people involved, get them involved. I'm here to create as many future stewards. It's in my mission statement, and I believe in it intimately that we need to protect our clean waters. If you see something going on in the stream, report it to me. The EPOs, the environmental police officers, are at a minimum. We don't have a lot of help. Take a picture of violators, whether they're whether they're violating by throwing trash on the ground. You know, when I say take a picture, certainly you want to be indiscriminate. You don't want to get into a boxing match, okay? But if you see people that are taking more fish than they should take, if you see people fishing in areas where, you know, it's not allowed, fly fishing only section, so to speak, and somebody's, you know, got a worm in there or some other type of bait. The point I'm making, folks, is we need to protect our clean waters at every single cost. Get involved with your local organizations here at the club. Do what you can to promote the club. Do what you can to promote area ponds and streams. And especially, hold on to it dearly, because if we don't, we're all going to be worse off for it. It's our lifeblood is clean water, and it's running away from us. Urban sprawl and a lot of other things are killing us today. So please hold on to clean water intimately. Okay, we'll start the movie. I'm going to try to just let it run its course, but if there's a really pressing question where you feel as though it's important enough to give us a hand, Steve will stop it, but otherwise we'll sort of let it just go. The curious thing about this scene, and I'll let it go, is if you see the neck on the blue heron, oh, never mind. We went past it. Okay, never mind. This is the Nissitissit. If you hear a little bit of noise on the line, it's because I'm fishing with one of those shark skin lines. Right there. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name's Charlie Shaden, and I'm here on the banks of the Nissitissit River, enjoying a beautiful afternoon while I'm fishing for a very finicky trout downstream. I've tied on a number 26 fly, which I produced at the shop before coming out, in hopes of catching this extremely finicky fish. I've been following this fish for about a week rising here on the river, and I've had no luck. I'm trying to catch him today. Fly fishing is one of those endeavors where you don't need a tea time to fish. If you've got a couple hours in the afternoon, you can come out and enjoy yourself, enjoy the beautiful surroundings, the pristine water. It's also an extremely therapeutic endeavor. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the future. This happened to take place right when they were having a duck race, and those are all the little rubber duckies on the water. We're about to enter the Shattuck oil area of the Nissitissit River, which is located approximately a quarter of a mile down the street from my fly shop. As you can see, the water is a little bit low at this time of year when we did some of the filming. This makes it a little bit easier for us to fish because the fish corral themselves and hold up in all of the seams and in the currents that you can see. We're now looking downstream at the Shattuck oil area as the water cascades over the rocks into some of the pools. As you notice, a lot of the earth that is normally covered with water during most of the year is uncovered here because of lack of rainfall. This particular area of the Nissitissit River provides ample parking and also easy accessibility to be able to fish the river. It is a particularly advantageous place to take younger children as well as anybody a bit older to fish. Also, this part of the river affords you the opportunity to bring people to fish that don't necessarily fly fish. It provides easy wading as well as the opportunity to catch fish in an open area without having a lot of obstructions to be concerned with. Downstream from the Shattuck Oil Bridge is a set of rapids, approximately 150 yards from where we started viewing the film. At the end of these rapids is a nice deep pool that typically holds fish because of the current flowing in there. And it's an area that you absolutely want to fish before leaving that top part of the Shattuck Oil area. I recommend it highly that you fish this before moving downstream. As we walk through the gate at the Henry Colombo area, with each step we take approaching the river, hope begins to spring eternal. This is a popular area on the river to fish. As you can see, two of our fellow fly fishers are about to embark on this section of the river. As we walk down the path toward the river, we're approaching the monument that was put up to honor Henry Colombo. His efforts, along with Peter E. Bertozzi on the Squannacook River, to protect much of this land and the land along the Squannacook, provides us with the opportunity to be able to fish this area in its pristine state on a regular basis. After about a quarter of a mile walk down the path, which by the way is an easy walk into the river, we'll approach two pools, one downstream and one upstream, where you'll notice one of our fellow fly fishers is practicing her craft. These areas provide ample opportunity to catch trout, as it is also an area where we stock fish at least 3 times a year. So far in the video, we've been able to capture some of the local flora and fauna, as well as some of the local wildlife. Now let's go see what the fish see on a daily basis under the water. You're going to begin to see some trout now, so keep your eyes open. This large pool, formed by a log jam on the downstream side, is a fabulous area for trout to hold in. At this point, it is approximately 7 to 7.5 feet deep. During high water, it can be as deep as 9 feet in this particular area, and provides ample cover for many trout to hold, as well as colder temperatures at the bottom for throughout the season fishing. As we descend underwater toward the log jam, you will notice that we have our first sighting of a rainbow trout. It is approximately 14 to 15 inches long, and as soon as he notices us, he swims away immediately. But alas, there will be more to come. At this point, I would like to share with you my initial motivation for wanting to make this film. I was hoping to illustrate the bottom of pools you may have fished for a very long time. I wanted to illustrate the visibility of the water as well as the holding spots for trout. In addition to that, I had hoped to create a fun video that we can all enjoy viewing. As we're approaching the Prescott Street Bridge area, I realized that I was about to disturb one of the finest fishermen that I've ever come across on this river. Big old blue heron. They eat sushi every day. Approximately an area of 100 to 150 yards, both upstream and downstream of the Prescott Street Bridge. This area marks the designated end of the fly fishing only section on the Nissitissit River. It marks the area where downstream of the bridge any type of fishing is permitted. Plenty of parking is available, and it is also a stocking point by the state for trout. This area of the river provides not only large rocks to fish around, fallen trees, but also a gravel area that could provide a spawning area for trout during either the fall or spring time of the year. In the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you will see an 18-inch rainbow trout. Right down here. Makes its way up the stream. That's a big old fish there. It's clear to me as we look around both upstream and downstream from the bridge and enjoy the beauty of the scenes that fly fishing offers so much more than just catching fish. Yep. The foliage, the quality of the water, and Mother Nature's beauty Thank you, Stu. is as much the reason we're out here fishing as it is hooking fish. The taggers have left their indelible mark of their artistry as it reflects in the water. This dam right now is going to be removed. By April 2015, we're all working together to get this dam out. This dam will be removed on the Nissitissit right now. Most of the studies have been done. From the Route 111 bridge, also known as the Hollis Street area of Pepperell, lies the Millie Turner Dam. The Millie Turner Dam breaks up the Nissitissit River at this point into an area that is fast water below the dam and a slow pond type effect above the Millie Turner Dam. This ponding effect of the river here at this point allows you from the Millie Turner Dam to float upstream in a float tube or in a canoe and fish some of the less accessible and remote pools on the Nissitissit River. It is a wonderful place to fish, very remote, and you'll have an opportunity to be away from almost all other fishermen. The Millie Turner Dam area can be 5-6 feet deep during the spring and summer, the early summer. But as the water begins to warm and the season begins to progress through late June and July, typically the water reduces to about 2 or 3 feet, and the fish do not congregate in this area because it provides an open area where the herring can come in and pick off the fish, as well as a tremendous increase in temperature. Therefore, the trout will move out of this area back up into some of the deeper pools. 30 minutes? This is the deepest pool on the river, the deepest One of the pool. most popular areas on the Nissitissit River. Gilman's Pool is located about 1/3 of a mile downstream from the Henry Colombo area and is probably the deepest pool on the Nissitissit River. It is also a stocking point for the State Department. Gilman's Pool can be accessed from Brookline Street, walking downstream about 1/3 of a mile on the river, or from the North Street side, where you have to park at a metal gate and walk in about 1/4 of a mile into the river. Fish are put in at this point approximately 3 times a year by the volunteers from my shop, as well as from the State Department. Many fishermen congregate to this area and most likely will fish it from the sandy beach side, because at that point you can reach even the farthest points with an adequate cast. It is a terrific area to fish throughout the season, and the fish rise actively in this pool. That's looking upstream. As we begin to descend in Gilman's Pool, one thing became apparent, and that was the first couple of feet under the surface of the water, the visibility was really very difficult because of the rays of the sun. We also discovered that the bulk of the fish in the pool were at that level and therefore a bit difficult to view. You'll see as the film progresses that we will be able to capture some fish, but they will be higher up in the water column. At the very bottom of Gilman's Pool lies a myriad of large logs. The pool is laden from all sides with trees that have fallen in the water over the years. I was surprised to learn that Gilman's Pool at its deepest point exceeded 15 feet. That to me was a startling revelation. One of the things that I noticed when we were diving in Gilman's Pool was a tree that had some steps nailed onto it by the kids in former years that they used to jump off of into the pool. I remember seeing that many, many years ago when I fished Gilman's Pool, and my memory was jogged by seeing it under the water during our diving. That used to be up in the air. At the bottom of the pool, that the turbidity of the water is surprising. There's a lot of stuff floating, and floating very quickly, even in low speed movement of the water. You'll notice that it's extremely populated with all kinds of matter floating. The fish that you're looking at in the video is a smallmouth bass. There are some of those in the Nissitissit River, as well as some pickerel and some fall fish and other types of little fish that are in the water. But for the most part, the river is populated with some native brook trout, rainbow trout, brown trout, and an occasional tiger trout, which the state stocks. We're now moving over to the Squannacook River. We're going to be filming the area behind the Farmers Exchange off of Route 13 South out of Townsend Center. The Farmers Exchange building is located behind the Dunkin' Donuts and is easily accessible with plenty of parking. The pool behind the Blue Seal or Farmers Exchange building is an area where the State Department stocks many fish, and as the water cascades over the rocks into the deep pool, it provides a really nice holding area for trout to sit. This is a wonderful area to fish and has a deep pool at the very base of a small makeshift dam or waterfall at its head area. This particular area of the Squannacook River provides a terrific holding point for trout because the water is oxygenated and the pool is approximately 5 to 6 feet deep. It's best fished from across the river on the sandy beach area, and as the water begins to recede, you can cross the pool at the tail end and get over to the sandy side. I suggest that you fish it from there. There's the sandy side over there. And then it goes right down river, right? There's the sandy side. The Squannacook River holds a special place in my heart. It's where my godfather started me fly fishing approximately 45 years ago, and I owe him a debt of gratitude for providing me with the opportunity to participate in the general art of fly fishing. Lots of deadfall, but lots of dry fly fishing too. So bring your bamboo rods up and have at it with the dries. Great place to dry fly fish. As we travel west on Route 119, we come to 3 landmarks: the Townsend Fire Department, the Brick Steamer Ice Cream Stand, and Shepherd's Sales and Service. Across the street directly from Shepherd's is a beautiful grassy, manicured area where you can enter the Squannacook River. You can park your car right at the end of the grassy area, walk into the river, and begin fishing immediately. It is a terrific area that constitutes approximately 1,500 to 2,000 yards of fast pocket water, which provides you an opportunity to do some nymph fishing all the way up to the dam, and from the fast water where it ends down is slower, deeper pools. The fish congregate at the end of the fast water in one particular deep pool, and you often have the opportunity to go into that pool and catch as many as 5 to 8 fish, depending upon the time of year. This part of the river marks the beginning of what's known as the downstream section of the Squannacook River. It's also an area where the State Department stocks a good amount of fish throughout the season. I've had tremendous luck in this section of the river for many years. If you migrate upstream in through the fast water toward the dam, at the base of the dam are 3 or 4 beautiful pools that are relatively deep, and I suggest you fish them because the fish, as they travel upstream, can go no further, and they will also congregate in those pools as well. This is a wonderful area of the river to fish, and as I said earlier, this section of the river marks from the dam down what is known as the lower section of the Squannacook River. We are at the Peter E. Bertozzi Wildlife Management Area on the Squannacook River. This section of the river is an area where I recommend to most of my clients from the fly shop that they spend time fishing. It's extremely remote. It takes a 15-minute walk or so to get into this area, but when you're out here, you'll generally feel like you're out in the woods of Maine. It's an area that holds probably more fish on the Squannacook than just about any other area you'll fish. There are deep pools marked by the swimming hole, which we're looking at here on the video, as well as when you travel downstream, Down there. there's some fast pocket water down to the cable pool, which marks a pool, as well as below that, there is another fast water area to fish. As you progress upstream around the swimming hole, you will encounter some fast water as well as some other deeper pools to fish. Up there. And I highly recommend that when you go to fish the Squannacook River, that you take in the Peter E. Bertozzi section, because it's an area where you literally can spend a day and not cover a major portion of the river. One of the most startling revelations as we filmed the swimming hole here on the Squannacook at the Bertozzi section was that the bottom of the pool was mostly large boulders and rocks. That was in dramatic contrast to the Gilman's pool on the Nissitissit River, where we found, as you saw, many, many large trees. There were virtually no large trees at the bottom of this swimming hole pool, which was quite startling to me. This particular area held some fish, and as we filmed the fish, we realized that most of the fish we caught on film were within a foot or two of the surface, which was very unusual because I would have thought that there'd be more fish down below, which didn't turn out to be the case. The one mature trout that you're going to see in the film, we actually saw him rising to some bugs 3 or 4 times, and we were able to actually capture him under the water as he came down from taking some bugs. Many of you folks have heard of the Loch Ness Monster. Well, the Squannacook has a very rare breed of fish known as the left-foot sneaker. I was able to catch a glimpse of that fish as it was hung up in some of the branches of one of the trees along the side of the river, and I'm proud to be able to display that to you today. Perhaps a good way to close this video is to... What happened?
I don't know, it said that there was skipping over damaged areas then?
That's the first time that's ever happened. Well, see, can we back it up a hair to see if it'll work?
Maybe.
I've never seen that before. I don't know if you can, but if you can advance it rather quickly, you may be able to. Yeah. Oh, what a shame.
I don't know how to do that, so we'll take questions.
Sorry, but well, at the end, what happened was there was a little teeny kid there, about I don't know, 2 feet high, and you know, there were several of us with $700 and $800 rods fishing, and he outfished us all. He had this little curly Q bobby rod, and he caught a beautiful brown trout that day, and that's the fish he was holding in his hands. And it was just a priceless moment that we were able to get on video. And again, it was a perfect example of it's not the arrow, it's the Indian. So he was able to catch himself a nice brown trout. He couldn't have been happier. So, and it just says at the end that I'm reminded to, whenever you can, take a kid fishing. Sir?
Charlie, the dam you guys are going to take out, is
Yes.
that in the northern part of the Nissitissit near the New Hampshire border, or where is that thing?
It's probably, let's see, it's probably a quarter of a mile at most from my shop and 3/4 of a mile from the New Hampshire border. It's the Millie Turner Dam. We're working on that removal now. Trout Unlimited has done a yeoman's job. I got a raffle going. I'm not allowed to run raffles. You have to be a total nonprofit. But I've donated a $700 Hardy rod. And the Neshoba Conservation Trust has become the sponsor of the raffle. So I got around it legally that way, and I'm just the selling agent. So if you want to have a chance to win a beautiful rod. But TU has done an outstanding job of really ponying up time, money, effort to do a yeoman's job. And I work 2 jobs, so I don't have as much time to donate to TU. I was fortunate enough to be one of the past presidents, but I don't have enough time to donate my time now like I used to. But if you want to know a lot more about it, I can help you with it. But TU is a better place. Trout Unlimited is a better place to go because they're really embedded in it now, and they're doing a great job. They're really a great organization. Sir, can I help you?
This isn't really related to fishing, but when you're filming the underwater scenes, what type of camera did you use to make it so you didn't scare away the fish?
Okay. If you noticed in the first part of the video, there was a collection of some beautiful trout under the water, both browns and rainbows. It took us 45 minutes for those fish to calm down. We had very expensive underwater cameras, some were $5,000 range, and it took a while for us to swim, get over there, and just relax a little bit to allow the fish to come back. So they weren't as fan-friendly as we would have liked them to be.
So, kind of had like a few months worth of footage compressed into this.
You know, that's a wonderful observation on your part. What's your name? William, you come by my fly shop, and I want to give you a free gift. That was a wonderful observation on your part.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it took us a long time. This is an amalgamation of scenes over the course of a long time that we edited and put together. And yeah, so it didn't happen overnight. The good ship trout doesn't turn on a dime as far as these fish are concerned. Sir, you had a question up here?
Well, we fished as a group here quite a bit, that Bartoli entrance there.
The Bertozzi area, yes, sir.
Bertozzi, yeah.
Yep, Peter Bertozzi.
And, you know, years ago, you could maneuver around that much easier than the last few years.
Yeah.
Seems like the riverbanks really kind of collapsed there. You used to be able to walk back there with a winding path, and now it's like jungle. You know, and sides have collapsed.
Yeah.
Was it Trout Unlimited that kind of made the path before? Or?
No, TU hasn't spent, in my opinion, they haven't spent as much time on the Squanny as they have on the Niss. But addressing that, it's like when you buy land along a waterway, the deed reads more or less. Some years it's more and some years it's less. And it's due to high water. Also, if you've ever tried to canoe the Squannacook, or kayak it especially, my suggestion is leave it at home because you'll end up portaging more than you will fishing because of the deadfall that's down, and the state will not let me under any circumstances take a chainsaw in there.
Why is that, Charlie?
It's basically for the development of the biomass. They really believe that all that wood in the water is going to help propagate biomass eventually for the fish. The Squannacook, and I'm giving you my humble opinion, the Squannacook is 10 times the river the Nissitissit is. It's deeper, it's got much more feeder streams, it's much colder, there's much more canopy to the river. The Nissitissit is a good river, but it just doesn't have some of the, it just doesn't have the appeal that the Squannacook has. It's a lot more open to the sun. It's slower, much slower. There really is very few pocket water places to fish along the river if you are a person that likes to nymph fish. I mean, it's a good river, but it warms up a lot quicker than the Squanny does. And unfortunately, I've been chastised by more people than not for what they say, putting too many people on the water. But again, that's done under the guidance of creating future stewards. We need to protect our clean water.
They always talk in the Squannacook about the Boy Scout camp as being a very good fishing area.
I think what you're referring to, sir, is the Bertozzi area. Yeah. I mean, that's.
Boy Scout is up above. You know where if you go by the high school up in Townsend, there's a V in the road. If you get down
Yep.
to the cow farm, if you walk
Yep.
down the river, there's an old Boy Scout camp there, or you can come in on a road.
Okay.
Pretty well.
Okay, that's below the Rossback Farm area on the Squannacook. Okay. I didn't realize there was so many people call the Bertozzi area the old airport and the old camping area because people do go in there and camp. But that Rossback Farm area is a nice area. That's Turnpike Road you're talking about. And there's a new bridge down at the end of that road there, and you might want to go in there and fish. I saw some other questions
So
back there.
we'll take one more question, and then we're nowhere to get out of here tonight, so
So
you can
I
spend time talking to each other or talking
I
to
saw
Charlie.
one other question back there. No? Nobody? Okay. Okay, well, again, thanks. I appreciate it all, and look forward to seeing you.
So.